Welcome, everybody. I want to tell you something about uncertainty about authorship, since that also has to do with privacy issues, of course. I will give 3 examples of authorship uncertainty. One is deliberately created by the real author. The other is based on doubts on the genesis of a text. And the third one is created, in fact, by gossip. And in this digital age, we have new methods of looking into authorship uncertainties, and that will change the way authors perhaps are writing as well. So that's why I thought this would be an interesting topic for this conference. I'll give examples from different time periods from Dutch literary history, from contemporary times, from the Middle Ages, and from the end of the 18th century. So I'll start with the first example, which is contemporary. So authorship uncertainty was in fact deliberately created by the author who published a novel, De geschiedenis van mijn kaalheid, under the name Marek van der Jacht. It's translated, by the way, into English under the title The Story of My Baldness. This novel got a prize, a literary prize for best first novel, but then some readers thought, well, this is remarkably much like Arnon Grunberg, an already published author. He had already published 4 novels, and he already got the same prize 6 years earlier. So then some people started to find a way to check who would be the probable author of this novel. And they used a new method from digital humanities, the zip method, using a compression technique to compare the novel with several parts of novels of other authors. And then the researchers thought they could be quite sure that Arnold Grunberg must have been the real author. And when that got published in the press, Grunberg said, yes, I did it. So he admitted guilt, you could say. So that's a quite interesting a thing happening based on the use of new techniques. Back to the Middle Ages, the second example of authorship uncertainty, which in fact could be said to have arisen from uncertainties about the genesis of a text. In the Middle Ages, of course, texts were copied manually. Each scribe could add or remove stuff from the text, could change the text, so you never know what you are looking at when you look at a medieval text. Is this how the author meant it, or has some scribe interfered with it, creating a new text, a different text? So the example I want to give is a medieval Dutch Arthurian romance called The Romance of Gawain, the Roman van Walewijn in Dutch. It was written about 1260, we think, but we have only one complete manuscript, which has been dated around 1350. So that's quite some time later than when it was probably written. It has quite a lot of rhyming lines, almost 11,200. There were 2 authors, which is stated in the text. At the end of the text it says that Penning started the novel, and that Vostaert, but that he didn't finish it, but that Vostaert added about 3,300 lines to the text. So about 3,300 lines. We're not sure exactly, this person mentioning this was not sure exactly how many lines. Scholars have been trying to find out at which line exactly the second author took over from the first. And they do not agree on this. And there's quite a big difference between some of the scholars. Most of them say it's around line 7,800 and something. But there's one who says, no, this 3,300 lines is a mistake, is a scribal error. It should say 300 lines. So the second author only added the last 300 lines. We thought that we could use modern authorship attribution methods to check where the change exactly took place. There were also 2 scribes in this medieval manuscript. So one wrote the first 6,000 lines and the other the rest of the text. We used what's called the Burroughs delta procedure. I won't go into that very much today, but the core of it is that you look at the frequencies of the most frequent words in the text, and that you use a whole corpus to compare all the frequencies with the text of which you don't know the author, and that the text that ends up closest in use of frequencies of words to the one you don't know the author of probably has the same author as the disputed text. But we had only one text and not a whole corpus. So we decided to divide our text in different texts by walking through the text, so-called rolling windows, you could say. And you should think of this something like the computer walking through the text, taking one line as a step each time, and this is the way we would expect something happening in the graph resulting from measurements on the text. So we would expect something like first author, a big dip, second author. That was our hypothesis for our analysis of the text. We looked at the 150 most frequent words, and in the first 50, so the 50 most frequent words, such as the, and, in, or, that kind of words, there was a big peak in the graph around line 600. And I just mentioned that's the change of the scribes. So not the area in which the author changed. So we, my colleague Joris van Zunert and I, who is chairing this session, really found something very interesting about what freedom medieval scribes took with their texts. They are changing things in the higher frequency words, function words you could say. When we looked at the lower ranking, 100 to 150, this is what would rather fit our hypothesis. So here we do see that there are two authors in this text, but we still don't see an exact line where the one took over from the other. If you look at the in-between section from 50 to 100, the ranking on the frequency list, we see author 1, we see author 2, but we also see something in between, which is a plateau you could see of about 400 lines. And that set us thinking that maybe we've been thinking the wrong way all the time. There is not one line, but isn't it much more logical that there's an area in the text in which the second author went back to a couple of hundred of lines to change what was written by the first author, who perhaps didn't finish it, who didn't finalize it according to his taste. So based on this approach, we are now looking in a different way to combined authorship. Third example, created by gossip. I hope you'll be most interested by the gossipy part of this. It's taking place at the end of the 18th century. There were two women writers, Elizabeth Wolff and Agatha Dalen, who collaborated on several epistolary novels together. And they were very good friends. They even lived together, and they wrote several epistolary novels. And Elizabeth has become famous. She is seen as the lively one, the sharp-witted woman who must have been the really smart of the two. And the other one, Agatha Dalen, is supposed to be rather boring, simple, in the shadows of Elizabeth. And that's sort of the idea that's been living since their own time. And they even stated that themselves, that people around them told them that they thought that Elizabeth must have written all of this and perhaps Agatha was only a secretary, and that they were very annoyed by that themselves. And in one of her publications, Agatha Dalen wrote about this, that this is a very good sign that these people stating this don't know anything about Elizabeth and Agatha, that they are totally misinterpreting their natures. And if she would find the time, she would draw up a list in which she would indicate these are the fictional letters that I wrote for our epistolary novels. Unluckily, she didn't get around to that, and so I thought, well, maybe we can use the new digital methods to find out if this is correct, if we can make sure that the gossip is not true. So we used multivariate analysis again, but now based on the Stylo package that has been written by Maciej Eder, Jan Rybicki and Mike Kestemont, which looks at principal component analysis, cluster analysis, and also bootstrap consensus trees. And I will give you some examples in the last 2 minutes that I have for this talk. The first one is to show you that indeed authors are recognized. I compared 3 of the epistolary novels of Wolff and Dalen with 3 other novels from the same time period, also epistolary novels. And if you look at the 10 most frequent words and do a cluster analysis on that, you see that the 3 works by Woolf and Dalen nicely cluster together and are separate from the 3 other novels written by other authors. So that's sort of the first proof that indeed our methods can distinguish between authors. But can we distinguish between Woolf and Dalen? One of the suggestions of the gossipers was that Elizabeth took care of the nice and the witty persons, the letters of the witty letter writers in their novels, and that Agatha took care of the boring ones and the religiously fanatics that are also in the stories. So we decided to make different text corpora for each of the characters. And we compared the 15 longest letter writers with each other using these same tools. And then we found that almost all the characters look quite alike as to style, that there was only a couple of characters that were diverging from the rest. They are leaving the cluster at the left-hand side, you could say. So our conclusion, in fact, is that probably they did not divide work according to letter writers, or they switched working on the same texts all the time, rewriting what each other did. So that's very difficult to test. The other one is that their style of writing is so much alike that they can't be told apart. But anyhow, that sort of proves that they did collaborate very closely on these texts, and that it's difficult to distinguish between them. We could also test that by looking at their private correspondence from the same time period. So that led to another graph. And it's a bit difficult to see, so I'll explain what I think that we can see, namely that the forewords and the afterwords of the texts they wrote together, which was undersigned by Elizabeth, is indeed most probably by her, based on her private letters. And on the other side, that their letters are also very much alike, even when they write them to other persons. So to sum up about this last case, the 2 authors cannot clearly be distinguished, so I think it's very plausible that they did collaborate just as they told us in their own texts. And there's no reason to believe the gossip that Dalen was very much inferior to Woolf. And in this case, I would say trust the author. To conclude my talk, what can we say about authorship in the digital age? Well, by having new methods to find out who the real author of a text is, I think things could change in how authors write. We can apply that not only for contemporary texts and forcing authors to admit that they have been writing under an alias, but we can also use it to look at the past and try to solve authorship problems from the past. All of this opens certainly very much new opportunities in research directions in the digital humanities. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Karina, first of all, for a very interesting talk. Indeed, any questions from the audience? Rudolf.
Oh, yeah.
Just stand up so that the audience can actually see.
It's Karina, I was just wondering about the medieval texts, because we have authors and copyists. You know now the 2 authors from Boudewijn, but is there also, I couldn't quite grasp it in the quickness of the presentation, but there's also a distinction between copyists itself. I mean, copyists can also alter texts, and then you have, well, 2 answers to 1 question you might have. Can you comment on that?
In fact, what we found is that by looking at the different ranking in the frequency list of words, we could see where copyists were most active and where authors are least interfered with. So the more frequent a word is, the easier it was for a scribe to change it. So it's easy to leave out a particle, an article, or a conjunction, but it's much more difficult to change a noun, to change content words. And I think we have given the start to new research about not only scribes in medieval texts, but also editors in modern texts. I think it's about comparable that they could do the same thing as a scribe did in the past.
I can't resist the opportunity to ask you a question myself. I don't know how much you studied the Grunberg case, but I wonder if you know if he or if you know of other examples in Dutch literature where authors start playing with the boundaries between fiction and their real life. I think Grunberg, if I remember correctly, was trying to not so much write a novel under a pseudonym, but he was trying to deliberately kind of diffuse these boundaries between what is actually literature, what is real life, what is the life of the author, in fact what his privacy is and how much his own literature can invade that kind of privacy. Do you know of any examples where authors start playing with that in history? Or?
Yes, there are some other examples. One of them is a novel by Atte Jongstra, The Life of Henry Fix. Right. He makes use of historical documents and presents his novel as sort of a historical ego document. And that gave rise to discussions in the press as well, about plagiarism, for instance, right, and other kinds of things. So there are examples like this, but most authors writing under an alias reveal that pretty early.
Okay, thank you. Maybe time for one quick question. Peter.
I was wondering, I happen to be studying a novel which was published first on an internet forum by an author writing under, let's say, false pretenses, pretending to be a girl in trouble and asking for help. Of course, in usual situations, people are using internet forums to discuss their problems, and anonymity is an important aspect of those forums and really a condition for these forums to be able to function. Do you think the techniques you are discussing are in any way a threat? Are they that effective that people should be afraid that their questions, that their identity can be decided based on the questions they ask on those forums?
It's a very good question. I think that depends on how long the texts are that they write. Because for this kind of analysis, if you want to be sure about the results, you need a large sample of texts. Ideal would be 5,000 words. And I think on many of the internet forums, messages are much shorter. So I don't think they have to be afraid yet, because we haven't solved that problem.
Okay, thank you once again, Karina, and another big hand to Karina for her presentation. And we'll continue to our next presenter, Roelof Hol. Please take a stand.